Hi, and welcome to Annual Spill Prevention, Countermeasures, and Control Training, otherwise known as SPCC, for Central State Hospital. So you may be wondering why you're here. The SPCC training is required by law, under federal law under 40 CFR 112, and also under state law at 9 VAC 25-91, which both have requirements for spill plans if your facility has over a certain amount of oil above ground. And because you handle or manage petroleum products at your facility that meet these criteria, you are required to have annual training. The goal of the SPCC plan is to prevent the occurrence of oil spills, control a spill from entering navigable waters, and to provide countermeasures to contain, clean up, and mitigate any spills that may happen. So who must comply with SPCC regulations? If you are a non-transportation related facility, which means your primary duty is not to transport fuel, you would fall under the SPCC regulation, which does include Central State Hospital. You can be reasonably expected to discharge oil in a harmful quantity to a navigable water of the U.S. You have an oil storage capacity that exceeds a specific threshold. For SPCC, that is 1,320 gallons above ground. For state requirements under the oil discharge contingency rules, that is over 25,000 gallons. Note that EPA only considers oil when determining whether a facility is subject to the SPCC rules. You may be wondering what kinds of oil are covered under SPCC regulations. EPA defines oil as any kind of oil, including but not limited to petroleum, which includes oil mixed with wastes, vegetable and animal oils, seed oil, mineral oils, and others. As previously stated, in order to be subject to the SPCC rules, your facility must have the ability to discharge a harmful quantity of oil to a navigable water of the U.S. But what does EPA define as a harmful quantity? Unfortunately, it is not a quantitative number. EPA states that any amount of oil that would cause a sheen on the surface of the water or shoreline, or cause a sludge or emulsion to be deposited on the shoreline or beneath the surface, is considered a harmful quantity. Navigable waters is defined by EPA as the waters of the United States or adjoining shorelines, including all surface waters like streams, wetlands, lakes, natural ponds, and rivers. At Central State Hospital, your flow pathway to a navigable water would be the following. Cattail Run and Rehoboth Creek both drain to the Appomattox River. The Appomattox River then discharges to the James River, which eventually empties into the Chesapeake Bay. So Central State Hospital is within the Chesapeake Bay watershed. This slide illustrates the major river basins in Virginia. As you can see, the James River Basin is in bright yellow in the center of the map. So why does your facility need an SPCC plan? Currently, Central State Hospital has approximately 20 above-ground storage tanks for fuel, most of which are for emergency generators. They range in size from 100 gallons all the way up to 80,000 gallons. Central State also has 26 transformers, 3 elevator hydraulic tanks, and 4 underground storage tanks ranging in size from 550 to 10,000 gallons. The total petroleum storage in above ground and underground tanks is approximately 111,000 gallons. SPCC regulations only cover containers that can hold 55 gallons or greater of oil. Things like transformers, portable truck tanks, 55-gallon drums, elevator hydraulic tanks. If any of these has the potential to hold 55 gallons or greater, regardless of how much oil is actually contained in the container at any given time. Which means if you have a 100-gallon tank, but you only ever put 20 gallons of oil in it, it still counts as a 100-gallon tank per SPCC regulations. SPCC regulations are not applicable to any containers less than 55 gallons or permanently closed containers. As we just stated, the SPCC rules exempt any oil storage container that is permanently closed. In order to be considered permanently closed, all liquid and sludge must be removed from the container, all connecting lines and piping must be disconnected, all valves, except for the vents, must be closed and locked, and there must be a sign located in a conspicuous location stating that the tank is permanently closed with a date of closure. Closed tanks can be brought back into service at any time as long as they meet all SPCC requirements. It is important to note that your facility's SPCC plan must be reviewed and amended under the following situations. Whenever there is a change in facility design, construction, operation, or maintenance that would affect the facility's potential to discharge oil. If the facility gets a new tank, if you move a tank, or if there's major construction that would change the spill flow from a tank, all of those situations would require an amendment and a professional engineer stamp. If you do not have any changes, the plan must be at least reviewed every 5 years from the date of the original certification. Training is required for the following personnel at Central State Hospital. New employees should receive initial training on spill prevention equipment and practices at the facility. All oil handling personnel are required to have spill prevention briefings at least annually. All training records must be kept on site for at least 5 years. You will see the training roster form located in Appendix C of your plan. Now we will take a short little quiz to go over some of the things we have discussed so far. What does SPCC stand for? SPCC stands for Spill Prevention, Control, and Countermeasure. Are quart containers of oil covered under the SPCC plan? No. Only containers 55 gallons and over are regulated by SPCC. Who must be trained in SPCC requirements? All personnel who regularly handle oil products. Now let's take a look at some of the important parts of the plan. You'll see a cover sheet from the most recent spill plan on the right, and you'll notice the title says Integrated Contingency Plan. That is because Central State Hospital must meet both federal SPCC requirements as well as state ODC requirements. So instead of having two separate plans, they are integrated into one to make it easier for the facility. You will have signature pages. A professional engineer must stamp and sign the plan along with someone from the facility. You will have a physical layout of the facility showing oil storage locations, stormwater drainage, and other important features, spill response procedures, spill accident report, inspection checklists, and training records, all of which we will discuss in more detail later in the training. Here's an example of the facility site plan for Central State Hospital. Some of the important elements of the integrated contingency plan are security, discharge prevention, spill containment, flow pathways, countermeasures, response procedures, reporting requirements, and record keeping. Central State Hospital security is on duty 24 hours, 7 days a week. The starter controls on the fuel pumps are located within a secure area and should be locked when not in use. The loading and unloading connections of fuel piping should be securely capped when not in use. And facility lighting should be adequate for leak detection during low natural lighting conditions. Now we will take a few slides and discuss discharge prevention and how we can prevent spills at the facility. The most likely scenarios for oil spills are the following: overfilling the tank, fuel transfer hose disconnect or break, damage to the tank, or even a delivery truck accident. How can we prevent overfilling a tank? It's very important to accompany vendor during routine transfers, especially if the driver or contractor is new and has not delivered oil to the facility previously. Make sure you verify the volume of the product that the tank can accept before you offload. Some facilities also have what's called an automatic tank gauge system. Other tanks may have an audible high-level alarm, which means an alarm will sound when they are filled over a certain amount. Tanks also have what's called an overfill protection valve, which will shut off flow to the tank when they are filled to 90 or 95% full. How can we prevent release from the delivery truck itself? Again, make sure personnel accompany vendor during routine transfers. Make sure the driver stays with the truck. Ensure that the vendor places wheel chocks under the wheels while transferring to prevent departing. And make sure you follow all fuel loading and unloading procedures. How can we prevent release from the tank? It is very important that personnel inspect the tanks to ensure that they meet all SPCC and ODC requirements. Above ground storage tanks and containers must be inspected daily, weekly, monthly, and annually for signs of leakage and deterioration, and these records must be kept for 5 years. Most above ground tanks at the facility are double walled, which means they have a primary storage tank surrounded by a secondary tank with an interstitial space that can capture any leaks from the primary tank. Underground storage tanks have an electronic leak detection system, which means any product in that interstitial space will trigger an alarm. Table 8 in your integrated contingency plan summarizes the inspections that are required at Central State. You can see that there are different requirements based on the size and functionality of the tank. All above ground tanks and containers above 55 gallons, this does include portable truck tanks and drums and any other containers over 55 gallons, must be inspected monthly and annually for signs of leakage and ensure that the condition of the containers and tanks meet specifications. The 80,000 gallon number 2 fuel oil tank has a bit more strict requirements. They do require a daily inspection of that tank along with weekly, monthly, and annual. This slide provides an example of one of the monthly storage tank checklists that's provided in the plan. You will notice that the 80,000 gallon number 2 fuel oil tank has its own individual checklist since it has more specific requirements. Here's an example of the daily storage tank checklist for the 80,000 gallon tank. And as you can see, the daily checklist is fairly short. They are basically just checking it to make sure there are no leaks, whereas the weekly and monthly inspections look more at the tank and the appurtenances to make sure everything's working correctly. Now we will look at some of the tanks around the facility so that you can familiarize yourself with the types and sizes of tanks that Central State has. This is a 550 gallon diesel above ground tanks located next to the 80,000 gallon tanks. You can see some important pieces and parts are labeled, which is important to know these when you're doing inspections. You'll see the spill box, which is where they fill the tank. The box is there to catch any drips that may come from loading and unloading. You'll also see an emergency vent and an interstitial port. The interstitial port is where you can check to see if there's any water or fuel located in the secondary containment. These tanks are what we call skid mounted tanks because they can be moved from location to location fairly easily. On this slide, you will see an emergency generator, what we call belly tank. It's a double wall tank located under the generator. You'll see it's on a concrete slab, which makes it easy to detect leaks and spills. Inside the generator, you will see the level gauge, fill port, and emergency vent. This is an example of a typical double-walled tank. Now we move on to spill containment. SPCC regulations talk about two different types of secondary containment. One is sized and one is general. Sized secondary containment is required for non-portable above-ground storage tanks. Secondary containment must be sized to contain the largest single container plus sufficient freeboard, which is typically about 110%. For example, if you had a 100-gallon tank, you would have to ensure that your spill containment device would be able to hold 100 gallons plus 10%, so it would need to hold at least 110 gallons to meet SPCC requirements. Some examples of sized secondary containment at Central State include double-walled above-ground tanks, which we just saw some photos of, concrete dikes. The 80,000-gallon number 2 fuel oil tank at Central State is surrounded by a large concrete dike, and also storage sheds with floor grates that are more than enough to contain 55 gallons plus 10%. But just note that all containers must have some sort of spill containment available. General secondary containment is required for the following: portable fuel above ground storage tanks, such as the tanks that are in the back of a pickup truck for fueling equipment in the field, or they may be mounted on a trailer. Keep in mind that if these tanks are taken out of transportation mode and are stored on the ground for a significant amount of time, they would also require sized secondary containment. Mobile refuelers and tankers, trucks that are actually transporting fuel to and from facilities, only require general secondary containment. Oil-filled equipment, such as the transformers and elevator hydraulic tanks located at Central State, only require general secondary containment. General secondary containment means that there's no size-specific volume requirement. It's typically based on spill size and not container size. Most facilities use spill kits to provide adequate general secondary containment. In order to provide general secondary containment at your facility, you must ensure that spill kits are available and accessible at oil storage locations, and especially for portable above-ground tanks. If you drive a truck with a portable tank in the back, you should ensure that you have some spill equipment inside the truck to be able to deal with leaks and spills that happen during transportation. Spill equipment comes in all shapes and sizes. Absorbent pads come in a variety of colors. Gray pads are typically used for universal spills. They will pick up water and oil-based products. White pads are typically used in outdoor situations or anytime there's a storm involved. They only pick up oil products, so they are great for taking a sheen off of a surface water. Pink pads are used for acid spill cleanups, so they are great if your facility stores batteries or any other acid products. Absorbent booms, socks, and pillows are also other options. They are great to have on hand. They are flexible and can be used to create a barrier around a spill to contain the spill. They can also be used to protect culverts and drop inlets. And oil dry, which a lot of people refer to as kitty litter, which is easily accessible from just about any auto parts store, Lowe's, Home Depot. Oil dry is one of the only spill equipment that can actually be used over and over. You can reuse oil dry until it is saturated, at which point it needs to be disposed of properly. Keep in mind that once spill equipment is used to clean up a spill, it must be disposed properly and not placed in regular trash. Okay, so now we've covered the difference between sized and general secondary containment. Remember to check before you drain any secondary containment structure. This is especially important at Central State. There is a large concrete dike surrounding the 80,000-gallon tank, which must be drained regularly to prevent stormwater accumulation and to ensure that proper secondary containment is maintained. You must fill out the form in Appendix C before each containment is drained. You must inspect the water and note that no sheen is observed before you release the rainwater. If you do see a petroleum sheen, you need to inform the environmental coordinator, which in this case would be the physical plant director, and he or she will schedule a clean out, and the oily water will need to be transported off-site by a certified contractor. Remember to keep all valves in the closed position at all times unless you are emptying the containment. Here's an example of the release of secondary containment drainage form. As you will see, you note the inspector, the structure, whether you see any foam, outfall staining, oil sheen, when you released it, date, time, approximately how much, and you must retain that form for at least 5 years with your integrated contingency plan. So we've discussed spill prevention, control, and now we will discuss countermeasures. Spill kits and absorbent material on site serve as control and also serve as a countermeasure. Also ensure that you have incidental and major spill response procedures posted in conspicuous places so that if there is a spill, employees understand the procedures and who to call in case of a spill. Also, if your facility happens to have earth-moving vehicles, you can use those in some cases to create an earthen berm or dam if needed. Okay, now it's time for quiz number 2. Question number 1. Who is responsible for inspecting portable fuel ASTs and 55-gallon drum storage areas? A, the Spill Prevention Coordinator. B, Virginia DEQ. C, designated facility personnel with SPCC training, or D, EPA. The correct answer is C, designated facility personnel with SPCC training. Please make sure that anyone filling out inspection checklists has the proper SPCC training. Question number 2. If a secondary containment structure is full of rainwater, under what conditions may it be drained? A, if the rainwater threatens to overflow the containment structure. B, if the rainwater is free of petroleum and Form C is completed. C, if draining is done while an EPA inspector is present. The correct answer is B, if the rainwater is free of petroleum sheen and Form C2 in the SPCC plan is completed, you may drain the secondary containment structure. As discussed, one of the countermeasures under SPCC is to ensure the facility has oil spill response procedures. So we will take a few minutes to go over proper procedure. If you discover a spill, please make sure that you exercise personal safety first. Secure the area if you can, restrict access, and remove any ignition sources, especially if you're dealing with a flammable material. Remember that when we talk about spill response here, we are only talking about oil products. We are not talking about other hazardous substances and materials that you may not be properly trained to handle. Stop the source if you can without endangering personal safety. So for example, if you walk into the shop and a 55-gallon drum of hydraulic oil has been tipped over, you can upright that drum to stop the active leak. But if it's an oil tanker on site delivering fuel and there's a catastrophic failure, a hole in the side of the tanker, that's not something you're going to be able to stop without endangering personal safety. In that case, you would walk away, notify your supervisor, or contact response personnel. If you do have to call response personnel from the local hazmat team or fire department, make sure that somebody meets the response personnel at a safe distance from the spill and directs them to the spill. The supervisor and the response team will then coordinate response and cleanup efforts. Properly trained personnel will contain and control the spill, and then properly trained personnel will clean up spilled material after. You will have to contact the spill prevention coordinator for proper disposal procedures. The spill prevention coordinator will be the only one to complete appropriate notification forms and reports to state and federal regulators if applicable. When you first discover a spill, make sure you survey the area. What is the most immediate hazard? Are you in imminent danger? If the answer to that is yes, then you walk away and you call for response personnel. Is the spill headed for a drain or for coworkers? Can you act safely to stop the leak? If so, then proceed. Safety data sheets, formerly known as MSDS, now only referred to as SDS. This is important that you keep SDS for the chemicals and substances that you use on a daily basis accessible and up to date. Make sure you review SDS for safety precautions, for proper handling of chemicals, necessary PPE, disposal procedures, and cleanup procedures. If you can take action to prevent the further release of material, please do so. Secure the work area, contain the spill with the equipment you have on site. As you can see in the picture in the lower left-hand corner, those are absorbent socks or booms being used to contain a spill, and then pads being laid in the middle to absorb the spill. Note that the discoverer has on gloves to make sure that you're not getting any contact with the product. You can see the picture on the right, lower right-hand corner. That is a silicone cover for a drain. Those create an airtight seal. They're especially good to have on site if you have outdoor drop inlets near oil storage locations. And up in the top right corner, you will see they are using absorbent pillows there to protect a drop inlet from an oil spill nearby. You also want to go ahead and initiate notification responsibilities, notify your supervisor or environmental personnel as appropriate. Notification responsibilities. Whoever discovers the spill should contact their supervisor, or if that's not possible, go ahead and contact the spill prevention coordinator, which in this case is your physical plant director. If you need help from a hazmat response team, you will need to contact Dinwiddie Fire Department if necessary. Just so you know, there is no threshold for calling the hazmat team. If you have a spill that you do not feel comfortable handling or you cannot handle with the spill equipment you have on site, please feel free to call the fire department. That is what they are there for. Do note that the fire department and hazmat response team, their job is to contain and control. Their job is not to clean up. So they will come on site, they will contain and control the spill, and then the facility will have to reach out to a contractor to remove the material and properly dispose of any impacted soil or other products. The spill prevention coordinator will make decisions regarding spill cleanup, will ensure that all appropriate regulatory agencies are notified if necessary, will complete an oil spill report, and ensure that that report is kept for 5 years with the integrated contingency plan. As we had mentioned before when we were talking about spill equipment, make sure that if you clean up a small spill with absorbent material, whether it's oil dry or pads, you place that material in a labeled container and call environmental staff for proper disposal. Do not put that in the regular trash. If you have a large spill that a contractor has to come in and either has to dig up soil or gravel or any impacted materials, the contractor will then be responsible for loading and disposing of that material in according to applicable regulations. The following spills must also be reported to Virginia Department of Environmental Quality and the National Response Center. But keep in mind, only the spill prevention coordinator for the facility will make these notifications. Any spill greater than 25 gallons to the environment must be reported to the state and federal level. To the environment means outdoors. If you have a 30-gallon spill in your shop and it never leaves the shop floor, none of it goes outside, that spill is not reportable to state and federal. Any spill to surface water or stormwater system. Note, there is not a quantity threshold, because if you recall at the beginning of our training session, we said that EPA defines a harmful quantity of oil as any amount of oil that would cause a sheen on a surface water. So any spill to surface water or stormwater system must be reported. Remember that all spills, regardless of size, must be cleaned up and disposed of properly. The emergency contact information for Central State is shown on this slide. You can see the primary contact is Andrew Conti, Director of Physical Plant Services. He does serve as the facility spill coordinator. The alternate contact is Wayne Drury, who's the supervisor for PPS. If you have any questions about the facility integrated contingency plan or any other issues, please contact one of these two and they will be glad to help you. And remember, all releases, whether they are reportable to state or federal or non-reportable, should be documented, and that documentation must be maintained on file at the facility for 5 years. Last quiz of the day. If I discover a spill, I need to contact 911, DEQ, EPA, and the National Response Center. That is false. If you discover a spill, you are only supposed to contact your supervisor and or the spill prevention coordinator. The spill prevention coordinator is the only one who should be contacting and notifying state and federal agencies. What is the name of the primary spill emergency contact for Central State Hospital? The answer is Andrew Conti, the Director of Physical Plant Services and also the facility spill coordinator. Well, that is the end of our training for today. I hope that you have learned a little bit about spill prevention, control, and countermeasures, and what an integrated contingency plan is, and how it relates to your everyday job. Please take the time and familiarize yourself with oil spill procedures and spill equipment locations throughout the facility so that in the event of a spill, you will know how to react and who to call. Thanks again.